coronavirus, especially what that means then for business in South Africa, where we see the closure of factories in China. What happens to those that are waiting for goods and for food to arrive from there? Joining me as part of this conversation, Ernie Lai King. He's a tax consultant. He facilitates a lot of deals in the country for Chinese and South African businesses. Also being part of the conversation, the Citrus Growers Association of South Africa CEO, Justin Chadwick, and Natalie Reyeneke is from the construction and technology law firm MDA Attorneys. Natalie, let me begin with you again for this segment. You've spoken about the delay to construction projects in particular as a result of the shutdown of these factories. Is there a plan B? Do you have one? Or are you simply going to be waiting this out?
Well, the interesting thing about construction contracts is they balance risks. When we enter into relationships with our clients as contractors, we specify how we're going to deal with certain risks. If it's a client risk, we deal with it in a certain way. If it's a contractor risk, we deal with it in a different way. If it's a risk that is outside of control of the parties, generally it's a shared risk. So when you look at the impact that it could have on both clients and contractors in the industry, it actually makes sense to work together. Instead of saying it's your fault, what are we going to do to work together? And one of those instances to mitigate the delays to the project would be to source the materials from elsewhere. If you source the materials from elsewhere, there might be a time delay and there might be a cost delay. And I think it all comes down to the parties working together to try and find a solution that's best going to benefit the project as a whole, the timelines and the costs of the project.
Is this something that's covered by insurance?
Not that I'm aware of. The contracts call it something, well, they call it a force majeure event,
sure,
which is a risk outside of the control of the parties. In fact, one of the South African contracts actually deals with inability to obtain materials and goods due to an unforeseen epidemic, which is quite interesting, which isn't in the other international standard form contracts.
The lawmakers certainly ahead of the times on that one. Let me bring into the conversation then the Citrus Growers Association's Justin Chadwick. Justin, so as it stands, while then you wait for the feedback in terms of whether or not these table grapes that you're exporting to China can be able to reach their final destination, what do the farmers here at home then do in the interim?
Well, basically they rely on that market for large volume of our fruit. 140,000 tons goes into China. So we have to obviously get working on the importers. Fortunately, our exporters have got very good relationships with the importers, and they will discuss the risks, etc., and they'll make a plan around what risks might be there. Fortunately, citrus is seen as a product that helps with flus and colds, and so we may even see an increase in consumption of citrus fruit in our season. And the other factor is that according to, for example, the New Zealand apple industry, they say there's more of an appetite for imported fruit because it's seen as a safer option than those products in the wet markets.
Sure, it's certainly quite interesting, isn't it? So as far then, in the interim, while you wait for all of these policy decisions to be made, what is the longevity of this fruit? Because we are talking about organic food here.
Yeah, in the case of citrus, it does have quite a long shelf life, longer than a lot of the other perishable ones. But obviously you can't keep it for too long. As soon as you pick a fruit, it starts to die. So you do want to get into the market as fresh as possible and as tasty as possible. The other factor perhaps that we need to consider also is containers and the equipment to get the fruit into the market. Because a lot of those containers are tied up with fruit that's been stuck in ports at the moment and cannot move. So once again, we hope that we'll actually have the equipment available to move that fruit into the market as well. So there are a lot of factors that one has to consider, and it's fairly complex. But we have had these sort of issues in the past, and our traders will find a way to get our fruit into the market.
All right, thank you so much for your time, Justin Chadwick. Ernie Lai King, he's of course a tax consultant. Ernie Lai, I'm going to perhaps give you the final thought then on this particular matter. Let's speak about what you believe the impact then on businesses in South Africa is going to be, because I know you've been reflecting also about the extent to which there is a stereotype that is being associated with the coronavirus that, of course, negatively affects, in particular, the Chinese population?